Welcome to another episode of the Crypto Conversion Podcast. As usual, it's Brandon, Matt, and Connor. And let's break into the news this week. But first, before we do that, if you could please like, comment, review, subscribe. We are continuously trying to grow, and we're putting out some pretty cool episodes these days, bringing on guests and just showing everybody new projects and new experiences to get involved in the Web3 world, and just helping you to learn more and educate the masses and allow you to have the tools in your arsenal to be able to educate others on what Web3 has to offer. So let's get into the news this week, because it was kind of interesting situation on Capitol Hill. And let's just get this one out of the way because everybody's talking about it, and you could probably get a better opinion yourself if you just go and watch the whole Gary Gensler interrogation from Congress this week. And it was kind of interesting just seeing the different ebbs and flows of that whole correspondence and everything. I didn't watch the whole thing yet, but I caught a couple of the hits at least from Congressman McHenry, and I always like looking for what Emmer has to say about crypto, considering his position with all of it. And then I really liked what Congressman Donaldson from Florida had to say to Mr. Gensler as well. So just what were all of your thoughts on it from what you caught? I know we didn't watch it from start to finish, but just from what you've heard and what you've seen, what are your thoughts so far on this? I don't know, what do you call it? Like deposition, basically, right? Is that what it's called? Or is it, I don't know what to call it. A hearing?
Testimony. Yeah, I don't know. You're asking the wrong crowd.
It was more like a WWE, match.
Yeah, honestly, that is true. It did have that vibe.
It was a roast. It was a hosted by. Yeah, no, I thought it was fun to listen to. It was definitely, I don't know. I definitely thought it was funny, right? We're all in the crypto space. So I was watching it, from the beginning, and then I stopped at some point and caught a couple clips later, but you could see, so this is what you missed in the highlights, is that very partisan politics. You saw people kind of, praising Gensler and just asking him these casual questions. And it's like, oh my gosh, we're so saturated in the crypto space that, we kind of forget that. The one that's been sitting with me, though, is that he admitted to never having used a wallet, never made a wallet or used a wallet or held any crypto. The question was digital assets, and he said, well, technically, the things I hold are digital because they're through a brokerage, but no crypto. And what got me about that, I remember when he became the chair of the SEC, crypto people were actually, at least some, were a little excited because he had taught a course on crypto at MIT. And so I was like, okay, surely this guy knows the space, right? He taught at MIT, a cryptocurrency course. And it's like, even if you didn't invest in it, there are test nets out there. Everybody should at least, if you're going to teach a course on it, make a wallet, get some test net ETH or, whatever other currency, send it to somebody, use a contract on the test net. I don't, you could, he'd never used it. He never used it. That got me.
It is very strange that, that just what happens there with crypto Twitter, because everybody was very excited about his appointment originally. I know I was in a space with CZ Binance previously, and I guess they had a in-person interaction, back in Gary Gensler's early days, and he definitely seemed to be somebody who was going to be pro crypto. So it's very curious what happened with him. What kind of political, machinations he, I guess, has. But
I wonder if it was pressure from the Fed.
I don't know if it was pressure, because he doesn't seem to perform like he's under pressure. He seems to perform like somebody with political goals.
That could be too.
Yeah, he seems to have some sort of aspirations. There's some reason why he's definitely being an anti-crypto SEC lead.
I feel like that's the case with a lot of these appointees and from this administration. It's very politicized, and I know that I speak from a biased point of view, but I'll just put this out there for the record. I don't subscribe to either Democrat or Republican. I am of the belief that we shouldn't have anybody in politics over 70 that can't pass a driver's test. I think that that's like, and I know that that's like very simple baseline, but I just don't think that we have people that are very competent in the highest of leadership roles, generally speaking. So, and I know that that can be, taken in a lot of different ways, but that's just kind of my general consensus. Like, I don't necessarily agree with everything every side says, but I'm listening to a lot of what RFK Jr. is saying these days, and I don't necessarily agree with him on a lot of things, but I find myself agreeing a lot more with him lately than I do Donald Trump. So
yeah, I was going to say, speaking of old politicians who are, on the party we might not normally agree with. Yeah, Robert Kennedy Jr. This week announced his presidency or his candidacy for president.
Yeah,
I don't know how whatever. He's a candidate now. I think it's interesting. He's definitely has, I don't know, some of his comments. I was listening to his announcement speech, and some of his comments almost seem like libertarian, or classically liberal, if you will. But at the very least, he seems pretty pro crypto, and he's kind of openly pro crypto. So I think it'd be cool. It's definitely a change of pace.
To kind of go off the crypto trend here, 1 second. I don't know if you guys agree with this, but somebody who I really respect in kind of the political sphere said, with RFK Jr. running, we'll really get to see where the Democrat Party is, because he represents an old school version of the Democrat Party versus where the party is today. So how many of those kinds of people are still left out there that are voters? That's going to be something I'm going to be interested to see from a political standpoint. But we're going to get off politics before we get carried away with ourselves, because like I said, I just really loved watching Gensler having to answer questions. Is ETH a security? What's going on with XRP? Just asking him the stuff that we've been curious about ourselves in the crypto space. I felt, kind of represented for a change with that hearing, which was refreshing. That the congressmen that were asking the hard-hitting questions had done their homework. I trust that Emmer gave them all a pretty good talking to about what the issues are, and I bet a lot of them did their own due diligence too. These guys, most of them, I like to think they're not wasting their time. But yeah, I don't know. I could be completely wrong here, and they didn't do anything. But I like to think that they did something this week. So. Yeah.
And even just I think one of the key points that was coming out of that hearing, though, is you can't both make the industry think of the assets as securities and commodities. And there's just no clarity in the whole ecosystem. And that's really what the SEC is doing between the SEC and the Treasury, is nobody knows how to follow regulations because there's just no clarity in the system at all.
When you have so much gray area like that, you can kind of make up the rules as you go, which is what's been happening the past, couple of years now. And it should be
so simple. If you're going to be issuing whales notices, then, you should be able to say whether or not ETH is a security.
Yeah.
It's like the biggest cryptocurrency besides Bitcoin in the market.
Yeah, there was I know we're trying to leave this topic, but there's a tweet today that Brian Armstrong quote tweeted as well. Yeah, that is a good question. Someone was like, why did they approve Coinbase as a security, right? You can buy and trade Coinbase stock. And they're their business model didn't change in the last 2 years, how were they, whatever, why did the SEC, allow them to issue stock, issue securities of their own stock, but now they're wait a minute, your business model isn't, whatever. Anyway,
yeah. Ironies stacked on top of ironies. Insane. All right, what else is in the news this week, guys?
I think there was an interesting story about Russia that looks like their central bank is going to approve international transactions using digital assets with crypto. So I think we all know kind of the reasons why Russia's looking to do that, and it has to do with the same reasons why they're looking to transact with the yuan now. And this is really a
And
currency
gold.
war in gold, crypto. They're starting to open up a lot of alternative avenues to what has previously been dominated by the U.S. dollar.
They're the world's gas station. They can choose their terms. Like, honestly,
I don't agree with that statement, but I know what you mean.
I know. I mean, like, they do a lot of drilling, and it's part of the reason why things have opened up a lot with them in China. And right, wrong, or indifferent, they are a player in that space, unfortunately, and it affects a lot of us, especially those of us that drive cars.
Yeah, which is interesting, right? As we think about, I know some people look at a crypto future, looking like, okay, Bitcoin is the digital gold. Like, this is going to be big transactions between nation states, and then you might have fiat or some other type of thing going on within, the nation itself. I don't know. That's definitely one vision out there that I've heard from people, and so this is the next step, right? This is a giant country starting to accept international payments. Possibly they're drafting a law. But
it looks like they're going to, and I guess from what I was reading, it's going to probably be with the state companies first, and then they're going to allow private companies to start to transact internationally with crypto. But their central bank is not looking to approve in-state transactions using crypto at this time. So you can still see, and I'm kind of curious how the central bank in Russia works with the rest of the central banking industry, for lack of a better word. But there's definitely political reasons why these central banks don't want to allow transactions with cryptocurrency, especially like in their countries. But you can also see the political reasons why they might want to start allowing it internationally, right? And so that's there's a lot of political games happening here, but all in all, it's going to prove to be good for crypto because it is going to spur use cases and adoption, and it's going to bolster the transaction.
And I have a friend that might be able to answer that question for me. He's not really crypto savvy, but he's very international currency savvy. So I might give him a ring later on. I haven't seen him since the conference anyway. So I'll have to touch base with him.
Not to belabor this, but one other interesting thing about the article I read was that they are also looking to introduce a CBDC imminently. So good and bad on the Russian central bank front.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. There's definitely CBDC is new, but I wanted to say that it's not new to have a central bank like not want their citizens to like use the things that are used for international travel. I forget when it happened, but there's been a time within the last 100 years where the U.S. government made it illegal to hold gold, because gold was used for international payments. And so they said, no, you guys are going to use the dollar. It's backed by gold, however much gold we have in this safe. But anyway, so I don't know. It doesn't seem too out of the ordinary that Russia would say, okay, no, we can use Bitcoin for international payments, but like you guys can't use Bitcoin.
Well, I guess what I'm trying to make a point of, in an analogy, it's almost like when mom and dad are arguing and you can get something from mom that you're not going to get from dad because of that, right? That's kind of what the crypto industry is going to get between this whole international battle between America and Russia, China.
This Cold War that we're in right now. So it's just weird across the board on multiple sectors in the economy. So Tornado Cash, interesting stuff. How do you say his name? Alexey.
It's Pertsev, I believe.
Pertsev, yeah. Alexey Pertsev got released by the Dutch government, but under surveillance.
Right, and it's going to happen in the next week. So he's not officially released, but the court case did make that decision. So he's going to be under surveillance, and the criminal investigation is still ongoing. Like Brandon said, There's going to be an ankle monitor. He's not allowed to leave the country. So
Probably not allowed on the internet either.
probably not.
Got to read a lot of books.
I was going to say, still fun things to do, right? If you're, trapped at home or in your neighborhood, right? Without
My
Well,
gosh.
And people don't realize, like, he's literally been in a jail cell, in many cases, not even allowed to interact with people on the outside. I haven't followed it that closely, so I think he's had some outside contact. But for a large portion of it, held without charges in a jail cell, not allowed to see his family, and particularly for us being a Christian crypto podcast, one of Alexey's original appeals was that he just wanted to be able to attend church with his family on Sundays. And so it's good to be able to see that hopefully he's going to be able to do that. I don't know if he's allowed to leave his house. I'll have to check that. But at least he's able to, spend time with his wife and kids.
And like his whole thing still, it's like allegedly foreign nationals that we don't want to use those types of things were supposedly using it for laundering.
Yeah, well, yeah. So most people are saying, well, this is going to be a court case about the code and whether or not he's liable for the code that he built or helped build because he was a contributor. But that's really not. The court case is actually going to be about money laundering. And they're going to attempt to say that he was actually directly involved in helping North Korea with the money laundering. So that's what the court case is about. That's what the topic of criminal investigation is. I think it's probably not true, but
yeah, I guess probable cause, right?
Yeah, so it's interesting.
Really don't have
I
any
think
probable cause, as far as we can tell.
Yeah, but they might make some.
Yeah.
Sure. So I've been trying to follow. Very poorly, so don't trust any of my legal advice, right? Or finance. No advice from me. But I've been trying to follow, regulation development here in the States at least, and I've definitely seen and read certain drafts of things. I can't think of any of the laws off the top of my head. I don't think anything's passed, but certain drafts have been around, you are liable, you might be liable as a money transfer company, if you are able to control where things are going or halt the code or things like that. But the way it's written, it really seems like if you were to decentralize it, if you were to publish it and have no, renounce ownership or have no authority to turn it off and on, that you wouldn't be liable. So I don't know. I hope that type of view reigns a little more supreme. I don't know anything about Dutch law.
Well, I guess that's what I'm saying, and this is just passed on information from what I've heard from somebody who's been following the case a little more closely. But it's not going to be about that, whether or not he's liable for the code he built.
Okay, it's
going to be, was he directly involved with North Korea in helping them launder transactions through the protocol? So whatever the decision of the court case ends up finding, it's not really going to answer that question of whether or not you're liable for the code that was built. But that question is still ongoing in the U.S. Because with the Tornado Cash sanctions, that question seems to be up in the air because we don't really know who is Tornado Cash that was sanctioned, right? So is it the code builders? Is it the DAO? What is it? So
ongoing saga.
We're looking at time here. We have a great interview with Scott Lindberg, who runs Free Market Kids. I don't know if there's another named different company that he's part of as well, but
it's Free Market Kids. That's the company. Yeah, freemarketkids.com. Check it out.
Yep. So he talks Bitcoin and homeschooling and education. So what are your thoughts? What were highlights? What did you enjoy about the interview that we're about to play?
I appreciate the stage that he's in his life and how he was so eager and open to learning about the principles of Bitcoin, because I see so many people his age and state of life that wouldn't even take the time to figure out. So it's just really forward thinking of him. And I hope that someday when I'm his age, I will be that open to new ideas and technology if they make sense the same way that Bitcoin did to Scott. That's my hope that people get from this this interview, especially. I don't know if I'll make a whole business and board game out of it, but I hope that I at least have continual curiosity and desire to grow mentally and accept bigger concepts that are outside of what I'm imagining today even.
Yeah, totally. I think that's going to be a useful thing people will get out of this this interview that we've had, particularly that question of, okay, so you have a community that obviously could benefit a lot from Bitcoin and crypto, but how can you convince them of that? Like, what are the arguments you can kind of use to show them the use case? And I think Scott's done a great job of thinking about that for the homeschoolers and also through all the families that he's introducing to Bitcoin through his game.
But not just homeschoolers. This is for anybody. Like, if you like games, this is kind of for anybody. So don't think that we're trying to pigeonhole this episode for one sect of people here. Like, honestly, there's something to learn from everybody. And I think education is something that should never stop. So I think that Scott is a firm believer of that. And this episode highlights that at an exponential level, which will be really awesome to show. So, yeah, let's transition into it. Joining us on the Crypto Conversion podcast this week is Mr. Scott Lindberg. Mr. Scott Lindberg, he is the creator of Teaching Through Games 21 Bitcoin Lessons. If you have been on our Twitter account more recently, you've probably seen us commenting on his posts, or at least liking them, because there is we kind of share similar sentiments regarding Bitcoin and homeschooling. But we're gonna let him tell us more about himself and his background. So in the meantime, Scott, thanks for joining us. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I appreciate the invitation from you guys. I think I always enjoy meeting other people and talking about these things and education and the crossover. So looking forward to a really nice conversation.
Yeah. So let's just get right to the chase here. What is your background, and especially in relationship to Bitcoin? Let's just start there, I guess.
Okay. Well, my journey into Bitcoin really started 3 or so years ago. My wife and I had met in business school, and we made the decision that if we could live off of one income, and she could basically homeschool the kids, that we would, we'd give up a vacation, we'd live in a smaller house, if we could get by on one income, that it would be worth it. And so instead of going into management consulting like I had planned, and she had originally gone to business school to become an investment banker, instead I ended up going down more of an operational path, some light manufacturing, sales operations. Most of my time has actually been in logistics, so think of warehouses and supply chain. And I would listen to podcasts. I was like, I went to business school. I should at least pretend that I can speak business speak. And in operations, you don't necessarily really need an MBA to be in operations. It's leadership and it's problem solving. And so I would listen to podcasts, and one of those podcasts was the Investor Podcast. And Preston Pysh was one of the co-hosts. And during their reviews, they would have like a quarterly kind of like panel, if you will, and they would all go through their different stock recommendations. They were value investors. So I was just listening because I wanted to keep up and try to at least pretend that I had this degree. I could hold my own in a conversation. And he would bring up, hey, have you guys looked into this Bitcoin thing? And he kept bringing it up, and they would occasionally have some guest that would help speak to that. I don't remember the exact guest now. It's been a little while, but they had Plan B. I think they had Jeff Booth and Alden. They had some really fantastic guests. So that was the start. And from there, I would get books based on what I had heard, or I would hear somebody maybe was another podcaster, and then eventually Preston Fish went off and did only Bitcoin. Once I started, it was at first it was just like, what is this weird thing? I have a engineering undergrad. I'm like, I should be able to understand this, but it was just so weird. And at some point, it clicked for me, and I really wanted to share what I had found with my wife Tali and the family. And she, when you have 4 kids, she has some other things on her mind. She has things like their actual education and food and all the logistics and the 7 dogs and all the chickens that we had at the time. So it was, she really didn't have time for me to present this really weird thing. And that's where I started to create the game as I was studying Bitcoin, because I would learn something, and as I was trying to teach it, I would have to work out the mechanics. And then my brother, who's not a Bitcoiner, and my oldest son, who's also not a Bitcoiner, they're my game players. They would play test. And they would challenge me. So we had all kinds of challenges. We can get into it a little bit later, but this actually, I would have to go back and say, that's a really good question. And say, okay, can I send Bitcoin to myself? And I'd be like, I don't know. And I'd go do research, and I'd find out about coin joins and change and whatnot. And then I'd come back the next iteration and say, yeah, it turns out you can. So it was this constant 2 years of doing this, because I was still at my fiat job. But my wife she eventually did listen to an Audible book. And about a year after I was orange pilled, that's when she kind of saw Bitcoin, and we went to Bitcoin 22 in Miami for our anniversary gift to each other. And so what happened, I guess, to just round out the whole story, in October, my fiat job was actually eliminated. And at this point, our 4 kids are now done with high school. We're done with the homeschooling. And it was a decision: do we try to keep feeding the fiat machine and go and get another job that I'm probably not going to enjoy, or do we do something and actually go for it and put our money where our mouth is? And that's when we were like, yeah, let's commercialize this. Let's actually invest in the website. Let's travel to meetups. And that's where we are. It's 6 months later. So we're still very, very new in this. I consider myself super new into Bitcoin. I guess you'd say we're class of 2020. I consider myself a newbie, but I love to learn. And so, like the book that you mentioned, the game, the articles that I'm writing, I'm sharing my perspective on the things that I'm learning. I'm not one of those guys that actually ever invested in the other currencies. I've heard a lot of people say, "Oh, yeah, everybody comes in that way." I didn't. I found Bitcoin to be hard enough to learn that I didn't have any mental bandwidth really to go further than that. And Tali and I have really enjoyed the fellow Bitcoiners that we've met. There's something very humble, very real. They have very similar values to us in terms of very libertarian type of ideas. And that has been super welcoming. And that's actually why I wrote the article on homeschoolers, because I thought there's a lot of similarities here to other people who just don't see it yet. But I think eventually they will.
Yeah, and I think one thing, that was masterfully summed up in your story there. I would say the 3 of us are the class of 2021, so not too farther after you, Scott. So
all right.
Yeah, but
the most veteran one here.
The one thing that your content and the stuff that you're starting to create in kind of your infant stage of making content about, you really like pushing home the concept of self-custody, and that's something that I really appreciate, because in all areas of life, we are recognizing places where we have tried to fill in the gaps of allowing the state or the government to kind of take that place. And what you emphasize, taking control over that, whether that be education and what Bitcoin signifies in the finance perspective, or going bankless as they're calling it now, it's something that is it's very intriguing to me. And of course, I've listened and I've heard a lot of the other Bitcoiners talk about it, but I like the way that you have described it and applied it to more aspects of life than just the financial realm. And I guess it kind of speaks to all of us because we just found out between Connor, Matt, and myself, we've all been homeschooled for an extensive period of our formative lives. For Connor and Matt, a little bit longer than me, but how
long were you?
Me, probably. So let's think here. Probably 4 or 5 years.
Okay.
Started going back to private Catholic school in 5th grade, and then ended up private school all the way through college, actually, senior year of college. So Catholic education at least, but I still had homeschool, a lot of homeschool friends, and we did a lot with homeschool groups still. So I was very much in that world and in those conversations. I just wasn't a true blue the whole way through. So. Yeah, but
similarly, we did homeschool groups. I went to a public high school, so I was homeschooled up until then. And so I am kind of curious. So Scott, I know this is kind of the homeschoolers usually get flack for this, right? Socialization. Were you part of homeschool groups?
Yeah.
I know you've mentioned just in passing with us that you've gone to conferences and stuff. How's the homeschool network kind of been for you?
So I just, full disclosure, I went through the public schools myself. I didn't.
Sure.
I was not a
Mm-hmm.
homeschooler from the perspective that you guys just described. And homeschooling, to me, it depends on what you want to make it. You can be very creative with that. You can use co-ops. You can do it yourself. You can use kind of like those semi-private charter type schools where someone else, you're actually dropping them off for a day a week somewhere. You can do online courses. I mean, there's really infinite number of ways of doing that. I had mentioned in the article that my concern when Tali first said she wanted to homeschool, I was like, well, what about the socialization? It's the number one thing I think people bring up who don't homeschool, and they could not be further from the truth. I find that most homeschoolers are able to talk to their peers, they're able to talk to adults, they're actually able to think for themselves and interact. Whereas I in my impression, public school is a lot more about compliance. You follow the rules, you do this. And so I kind of went from initially when Tali brought it up, being worried about it, to at some points thinking maybe they're a little too social. Like, wow, they're as a dad, you're like, maybe we should pull back on, some of this stuff. Because there's sports, there's theater, there's robotics, there are a lot of extracurricular activities that you can be in addition to the academics. So I don't think if anybody's thinking about homeschooling, that should be the furthest thing from your mind in terms of a concern. And homeschoolers, I mean, they're just people. So you have people have their different philosophies. And the thing is that it's all backed by love, right? I mean, the parents are doing it for a reason. And they're doing what they think is best for their child. And to me, that's a first principles kind of idea. It sickens me that the statist Marxist communist idea that somebody else should control what the kids think. I just find that appalling that it's even a question in our society with that. But the parents are doing it at a place of love, and they're going to do it the way they think best. So some want to follow a very strict regimen of here's your classes, and it's very they buy a curriculum, they stick to it. Tali, she went the other way. She would try out a program, and then if she wasn't sure how it was, she would try another one. I think she tried 3 different math programs, and she just kept on searching and searching and searching. She actually never went to a homeschooling conference while the kids were growing up. We just did this. This is kind of a new territory for us to actually go. It's probably good because she would have bought everything. So there's a lot of programs there. And so it's I actually don't even remember the original question you asked there, but we're in terms of the homeschooling community, it's very supportive. There are a lot of resources out there to help fellow homeschoolers and other organizations alike. So it's a very supportive network.
We talking about decentralization with homeschoolers. You're right. There's like there's kind of a big spectrum of how you can do things, right? There's some homeschoolers who do the co-op thing, and they kind of get together in groups and they simulate maybe a school experience with some other families or whatnot.
Yep.
And then you have people on the other side of the spectrum, which is what I would say my mom was, very unschooling, if you're familiar with that term. So completely decentralized, kind of, some people might think it's a little, a little too uncontrolled, but that's the way my mom was. So just reading your article and the things that you would talk about how homeschoolers are natural Bitcoiners makes a lot of sense to me, because my mom was very not trusting of any sort of systemic, way of doing things. I distrusted the Fed long before I even heard of Bitcoin, just because that's the way my mom was. Alternative everything.
I think that's
alternative
great.
Medicine, alternative money.
Critical thinking right there.
Food.
That's an example of critical thinking, right? I mean, you actually hit on a whole bunch of subjects. Critical thinking, for one. The decentralization, I mean, I don't know how much more decentralized you can get than the family.
Yeah.
Right? If you think about how Bitcoin's run on nodes and it's spread out, the lack of trust, it's, you're bringing it in-house. You're investing a lot of your personal time, maybe even a career, to make this investment, and it's not easy. You're only doing that because it's the proof of work, right? You're making the investment. You think it's going to be it's worth it. So you actually hit on a lot of things there. I will also comment on. Doesn't make sense to me that everybody's going to be the same, right? So the idea of a public school where you need to conform, everybody has to advance at the same amount of time, and maybe you're kind of a kinetic learner, you bounce around, we're going to give you some Ritalin. There's not everybody's the same. The beautiful part in a real free market is people who can specialize in the things that they're good at. And you celebrate the differences. So if I'm good at making games and you're good at growing tomatoes and somebody else is good at fixing cars and somebody else is good at a doctor, you can pursue those different things. And to me, the schooling is the same thing, but you can let the students go into different areas that they otherwise wouldn't study, and they can go a lot faster. If you have a gifted student, you can go as fast as you want. You guys can do college level math at the equivalent of a sixth grade age level. Yeah, go for it. So I mean, to me, that variety actually is a good aspect of the homeschooling. I think overall society and families and everyone are actually better with the variety than they are without. So.
For sure. No, I like the homeschool group thing, and because like you said, specialization, I mean, even happens at the parent level. Like my mom was the math person, she's taught at like secondary, post-secondary even, and so like all the homeschoolers, they'd get to a point where, the parents were like, gosh, I don't know if I could do algebra 2 with them, and they'd just send them over to my mom, she was the math person in the group, right? We had,
right.
Yeah, had all of that.
A lot of resources like others. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. I'm kind of curious. I know I can't remember if it was in the article or one of your tweets or something. You mentioned that you had a hard time kind of convincing the homeschoolers on Bitcoin. Do you, in you're talking to people, do you think it's easier to convince a homeschooler of Bitcoin or a Bitcoiner of homeschooling?
Oh, it's way easier to convince a Bitcoiner to homeschool.
Yeah.
Okay.
All I have to do is say the word self-custody or education, and they're done. Right? Do you trust somebody else? No. Done. Like it is so much easier because they have a framework. They already have a framework, and you're just following the framework that they already believe in. Whereas homeschoolers, you have all that variety. You're all over the place. Some are doing it for maybe religious reasons. Some might be doing it for special needs. Some might be doing it they're just libertarian. I mean, there are a lot of different reasons to do it. And then it's overwhelming because you're the orchestra leader. You have to figure out all the different components of that education, whether you're doing the algebra or your co-op person is, or you're getting something online for biology, or someone else is filling in for Latin. I mean, you have a lot of things to balance. You're already feeling overwhelmed, right? So along comes Holly and me saying you need to talk about money, and not Dave Ramsey. We need to talk about money, the history of money, incentives of money, properties of money, layers of money. We need to talk about money. And it's kind of like, well, all I've heard is there's a lot of FUD out there. There's FUD about energy. There's FUD about the money. There's like, it's overwhelming. It's confusing, and they already have a lot on their plate. So if you look at the perspective of your typical homeschooling parent, you already have a lot there. You don't necessarily need 1, 2, 3, 4 more subjects to try to fill into your already crammed schedule. So to me, you're kind of fighting this. They don't know what it is, and you kind of fear the unknown, and you on top of what you're already trying to do. And I think that's a really hard sell. Hey, let me take your time. Let me tell you why this is why I think this is valuable. Some will. We had a lot of healthy conversations too with people who did get it and understood our perspective, but it wasn't like people would walk by and just go, "Oh, I get it." Most of the time, the ones who would stop by, they'd be I've heard of it, but I don't really know what it is, type of thing, or they would fill in, I heard it's this, and then you're trying to explain this weird new concept that isn't taught anywhere else. And it's how do people feel when they do something new for the first time? There's probably a small percentage of people who get excited about it. A lot of people they go into the fight or flight mode with it, and they put up a barrier.
It almost sounds like part of the difficulty of convincing homeschoolers of Bitcoin is exactly what makes them such good Bitcoiners when they grasp it, right? It's just the fact that they don't automatically trust, some new system. At least in my experience, talking to, I would say, this podcast leans very heavily Christian, Catholic, and we're kind of doing the same thing for that community that you're doing with the homeschooling community.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of similarities, a lot of things that would draw people to Bitcoin naturally, but they don't trust, the code. They don't understand how it works. There's this guy who made it. They don't know who it is. They think it might be, it could be the CIA, right?
Monopoly money.
Right.
As my wife calls it some days.
Yeah, Monopoly money has a lot of comparison with the U.S. dollar. So Connor, though, when you have those discussions, though, from a religious standpoint, do you guys? I'm assuming you guys have all read the book "Thank God for Bitcoin." Even if you didn't like the ending with Bitcoin, the money aspect of it, in terms of the religious view, is really well laid out in non-technical terms. Let's see if I have Tali's book. You guys want to talk about here? This is Tali's copy. It's all marked up.
We need to do a book study on that particular book, and we have a lot of book studies that we're learning we need to do slowly but surely. So it's on the to-do list for this show. I have gone through the book. It's kind of a part of like a podcast book study, but I need to actually dive in and read it for myself to form my own thoughts and opinions on it. So it's definitely on the to-do list. But we'll transition to talking about the Thank God for Bitcoin conference as well, because Scott, you and we had been talking about it. But first, before we do that, I just want to know who. So you talked about Preston Pysh and his, who are some of your other influences that helped shape the way you have come to appreciate Bitcoin and understand its value more. Just so our audience can appeal to some others that have been in it a lot longer than we have.
Right. Oh, thanks for the question. I think the one that the book, The Price of Tomorrow, written by Jeff Booth, was one of the first books that I read early on in that kind of stepping into the research and wanting to learn for myself. And it's actually the book that I most recommend to people who are new to Bitcoin. I don't personally think they need to, even though my game is actually based on the mechanics of how Bitcoin works, that's not necessarily the most important thing for people to learn. If they don't have the framework they don't understand why there's a need. They're like, oh, I already have digital money, right? Money sent to my bank, it goes to my credit card, whatever it is. If they don't have the right mindset of how to think about it, then it's almost impossible to have that next conversation. So for me, Jeff Booth was able to take first principle ideas and put them into basic English, just everyday normal speak. You could talk to a teenager about it. You don't need a PhD to listen to him talk. And if you guys are not familiar with the book, the premise is there are two forces that have a lot of momentum, and they don't work well together. You have, on one hand, technology is increasing at a faster and faster rate. So, at one point, calculators were the size of a gymnasium and you needed big cards. And then at some point they got smaller, but they were expensive and you had to plug them in. Today, nobody's going to go pay for a calculator if there's a free one on your phone. Unless you're an engineer and you're doing some very specialized thing. Because technology makes things easier and faster and better over time. Just think of any kind of technology like that. And it should be the same in other things, like education, for example. You, with the internet and with Zoom, why do you need a university? You used to need to have a university because you needed a place to actually hold physical books and someone to guide you through that. But today, there are free courses online. You can get anything in any language, anywhere, pretty much, right? Yet you had this other thing going on, and that is the money system is built on these Keynesian ideas that require inflation. And every time you have to keep feeding that, and then if there is a crisis, it accelerates how fast and what the magnitude of your response. And so that system is less and less stable over time. But you have deflationary technology, you have inflationary money system that the world is operating on, and we're on a collision course between these two. So if you read Jeff Booth's book and you're aware of that, when you look around, all of a sudden when you hear things in the news and someone gives you a new piece of information, you have context on where to put it. Why is it that price is going up if it's deflationary, and why? It's just it's eye-opening. Once you see it, you can't unsee it kind of frameworks. And so for me, that was a huge book to get my mindset ready to then study this very strange thing called Bitcoin. Because if you just started studying Bitcoin and the mechanics of it and how it works, it's just overwhelming. At least I think it is. Mm-hmm. But if you understand there's a reason behind the way it was designed, there are things that it solved that other things couldn't solve before. Now you have a context to understand why it's important historically, why it's important given where things are going, both with technology and money. So for me, that was absolutely huge. I read that early on, and it has been instrumental for me to kind of where do I put this weird thing we're talking about? Is it even worth my time to study? So to me, the answer was absolutely it's worth my time, because I don't know what happens with the money system, but it's we've passed the point of no return on the printing. So that doesn't end well. It didn't end well for China when they debased their currency. It didn't end well for Rome when they debased their currency. And the world is going to be in a lot of hurt. A lot of people are going to be hurting with the way the money system is going. And so Bitcoin is also hope, because here is this thing that was created that helps address the very root cause of that. And so now I have context for that. Now I'm excited about it. Now there's a reason for me to study it. There's a reason for me to tell other people about it. So that's the book that I would recommend to anybody who is not sure where to start. Although sometimes my wife and I will recommend Thank God for Bitcoin, because some people are just struggling from a Christian standpoint. They might be struggling with money in general, but most of the conversations when I'm trying to tell something to someone who's new to it, I'm trying to set the stage for why we're even talking about it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it doesn't matter. All these other technologies that we're going to get into and the attributes of Bitcoin that I like, they don't matter if you don't agree on where we are and where we're going. Otherwise, it's like, well, who cares?
No, absolutely. And what you're kind of emphasizing is you're giving people the opportunity to kind of till the soil to make their framework of thinking prepared for the concepts of Bitcoin and the principles of Bitcoin, and understanding those keys that I'm looking at the book a little bit here in terms of what that book is emphasizing in the core principles. You're helping somebody get their mind prepared to accept that there is an alternative that can be much more sustainable, and that's a good recommendation. I'm definitely going to look into it myself. So yeah, thank you for that.
I feel like that is the best way to really convince people of the efficacy of Bitcoin, at least in my experience, is you have to give them the why first. And a lot of people are already there, but you need to kind of help them connect the dots. At least in my experience, talking to different people who might have libertarian leanings or might be religious, for different reasons. Just showing them all the different avenues that the U.S. monetary policy is controlled and is used to censor, political activism and religious activism that we care about, is really a great eye opener for people for why Bitcoin is so important. We've talked about just on this podcast some of the different ways that the U.S. government has used monetary policy to censor Christians. And, I think one of the best examples in recent memory for people is pointing out like the Canadian truckers protest and how that got shut down by basically locking bank accounts, and how they were able to continue that for at least a time, by using Bitcoin. So things like that is really what gives people the why. And then you can also pair that with, okay, and this is also the how Bitcoin works, to kind of dispel some of those fears. Maybe that's the more difficult part, but I think that's where, if you're going to recommend maybe Thank God for Bitcoin or some book, it might also be great to recommend that game that you made, because that's a great way to introduce people to the concepts of Bitcoin.
Sure. Can you talk a bit about
you guys? Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, can you talk a bit about the game? I know we've mentioned it a couple of times. Just give us the 2-minute preview. How does it work? What's the objective and what's the purpose? Yeah.
And before you launch into it too, I'll just say that what I really like about the game, particularly coming from like a homeschooling perspective, we're always looking for unique ways to teach concepts. And you don't get that a lot in public school, right? You have a very standard curriculum. Yeah. Whereas as homeschoolers, we have the opportunity to, think outside the box and find new ways to teach principles that can be really powerful. And I think your game sounds like it does a great job of doing that.
I think you're right. I think the more tools you have to help teach, sometimes physically moving things around is just another. Sometimes people need to hear things multiple times in different ways, and that helps. I will tell you I grew up with tabletop games. I think there's a lot of value with all the screen time that people get to have some fellowship time too. So even if you weren't learning, just the idea that you're going to have a dedicated time and you're actually going to sit and spend time with each other. Maybe there's some awkward silence. Maybe there's some time to talk or not talk, whatever it might be. There's some other aspects of gaming that are completely unrelated to just whatever the subject are that have a lot of benefits. So I'm biased that I like the games. I agree with what you just said. It's definitely another way of teaching. So to the question of how the game works. So everything in the game is built off of it's some type of Bitcoin mechanism that I built a game mechanism to replicate. And it was a balance where I wanted the game to be simple enough that you could play it like you would play a Catan or some other family kind of game. It's not a game where you sit there and you take 3 days to play, right? It had to be playable. So that limits how technical you can get. But I didn't want to oversimplify it to the point where you didn't get these really cool elements of Bitcoin. And so that was the tension in terms of how complex to make it. That was what I was trying to balance. So in Bitcoin, I don't know where your audience is, so I'll just kind of give the high level of the way the game works. There's a thing called a time chain. It starts in 2009 and it goes to 2140. And this is actually the first year that Bitcoin was mined, and the last year that new Bitcoin will ever be mined. And along the way, there's some halving events. And so all that means is that it's not evenly distributed. If you mine a block early in the game, you're going to earn more than you will in the middle of the game. And if you earn a block in the middle of the game, you're going to earn more than the last part of the game. And so this reflects how Bitcoin is actually scheduled. It's very deliberate. It's approximately every 10 minutes another block is mined, regardless of how many people are mining or how fast their computers are. It's able to adjust for that. So that's for everything. All the Bitcoin in the game starts on this thing called the time chain. And then by the end of the game, based on creating transactions, all of that will be on the player cards. It has 6 player cards. It's basically just a little colored card that everybody gets. And we just call that a wallet. And so you could think of this in Bitcoin terms as a distributed ledger, because all the Bitcoin has to be somewhere. And once it's no longer on the time chain, then it has to be assigned to some address. And that's what those player cards are. And so your job is to get the most Bitcoin, to mine the most Bitcoin. The tricky part is there's some elements of chance in the game as well, as you can imagine. But the strategic part of the game is when you're doing those transactions, you're actually moving Bitcoin between the different color player cards, between the wallets. So if you're a green player and it's sending to blue, that the Bitcoin tokens in the game actually move between them as well. So you have to decide who to team up with, who to attack, how to defend yourself by going to cold storage. There's all these other planning things to it. But at a real high level, the second part of the game is all of the Bitcoin will be on those cards by the time the last Bitcoin is mined. And your objective is just to have more on your card than anybody else has on their card. You're trying to hodl up the most Bitcoin. And your scoreboard is this distributed ledger that's just a set of playing cards.
How has been getting the game produced, manufactured, and getting it out to market? I'm always interested in the business side of content creating and projects like that. The business side is something that is always factored in. What's something you've learned along the way regarding all of this for HODL Up and 21 Bitcoin lessons?
Well, he's a logistics guy, so he's probably got that in
I know.
No,
but it's always interesting to
Didn't make it easier.
The components.
Yeah, it was still very frustrating. So most of the game was actually made in China with different manufacturers.
Sure.
Some of those I found on Alibaba. I think some of those I may have found from having gone to game conferences before. So if you had your own company and you were going to design a product, you'd probably have some dedicated team do it.
Sure.
And you'd have your kind of prototypes, and then you would, manufacture the whole thing, and maybe you would outsource that. Mine was a lot more messier than that. I would play test. It could be everything from Mahjong tiles to playing cards to, I don't even remember all the components that I had as I would do it. But once I figured out a mechanism that I thought that was it. Like, this is okay. I figured out the time chain, or I figured out the difficulty adjustment, or whatever it was. Then I would go and I would look for the cheapest manufacturer to get that still met the quality levels that I was looking for.
Sure.
And the price of the shipping costs were at least 50% of the price of the items. So this was a very slow and painful way of designing a product. It if you were doing a business case study, this is not the ideal way to do it. And so for example, I have a school version on the way where I'm going to use cardboard instead of plastic and some other changes, because I'm using a high quality product in low quantities, and that drives up the price. So from a game designer standpoint, this feels really good. The game feels good to play. The problem is, if you're looking at it from an education standpoint, that also prices out some people in the market.
Sure.
So we're working on a school edition that should be here before the Bitcoin conference in May. And then ultimately, I'd like to be able to do this in different languages and be able to get out to other parts of the world as a teaching tool. So as much as I loved going to Bitcoin meetups and Bitcoiners love to kind of haggle with each other on this game because they understand the components. But it's also an education type of thing. You can play this with someone who knows nothing about Bitcoin. It's perfect for that. You don't have to know anything about any of this to just play a game. So if it's from an education standpoint, eventually being able to get to other countries would be ideal. And so I'm kind of torn, because as a game designer, I really like the high end side of it. So the game that's available right now is that high end, heavier or higher price type of product. But ideally, over time, if we increase sales, I can get the volume higher and I can get the price point down further just because of volume. That would be fantastic, because then you can get it helps everybody.
That's awesome.
The manufacturing, this was not. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, and people can buy the game in Bitcoin if they want, right?
They can. Mm-hmm. So we have a Shopify store, and we're using Strike. You can integrate. There's other applications that you can do. You don't see it till the end. So for your listeners that want to buy it and they want to use Bitcoin, you won't see it until the checkout portion, but you can pay with Bitcoin.
And I'll say I was at Bitcoin Miami 2022 as well, and nice. I saw Jack Mallow's presentation, and I know he's been doing a lot of work with Strike, with the integrations with Shopify and whatnot. So there's been a great community making payments happen with Bitcoin, right?
Yeah, you and I were in the room together. We listened to him speak. That was
so many people,
very inspirational. It's overwhelming. Yeah.
Gosh, this is
this is awesome. I'm on the website right now. So Matt, what were you going to say? Sorry.
Sure. I was just going to ask. So, with the game, are you looking to continue to add more features to it, like a taproot upgrade, the ordinals? I don't know, or do you have a different a next game in mind that you're looking at? Thinking about,
or an expansion pack,
or an expansion. Yeah, exactly. The taproot expansion.
So it's sort of yes to all of the above. So in terms of the game itself, let me break it out. The game itself. So the wallets have a hot side and a cold side. If one is just connected to the internet and one is not, basically, that would be the way of explaining it to somebody. But in the game, it just means if it's on your hot wallet side, I can attack you. And a number of Bitcoiners have said, well, I want to be able to move it to cold storage and actually do a transaction. And so the way I explained it to them, I said, well, look, if whoever's playing the game, it's sort of like, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with the Bitcoin improvement proposals, BIPs. Mm-hmm. I said, well, this is a HODL up improvement proposal. If the network, i.e. the people playing the game, all agree to a change, then that's it. You are the consensus of the network. And if you want to do that, and so I didn't, it was kind of my way out of trying to specify every different change that it was possible. And it turns out that particular example, we actually made a video about it. It actually is a pretty cool way of, it changes some of the strategy in the game. But we are doing other things. So we have game mats that we have it's almost like the same material that you would for gamers might have like a big mat that they have on their desk, almost like a mouse pad. So when the game version right now, it has the time chainer these hexagon cards that they're about the same size as Catan. You have to like set them out. So we're gonna have a game mat for those that just want to have like a really fancy game mat. I have the design basically laid out for an expansion pack that would allow you to have more players. You're gonna need more cards and some other things to do that. It's just a cash flow thing. We don't have enough yet. We haven't earned enough yet from our current sales for me to go ahead and pay for those the costs that we were just talking about a moment ago. And in addition to all these things, I have other game ideas for other things. There's so much with Austrian economics and other concepts to teach. Pardon me. Then I have so many ideas for other games. The vision is to create a game and then to have a book or a booklet that goes with it for those that want to use it for teaching and make it look like a nice set. So the intention is that this is just the beginning of what will become a whole series of things, because some of these concepts are so different. I mean, lightning is so different than trying to teach about energy, which is so different than teaching about Austrian economics. And but to me as a game designer, man, there's no limit. There's so many concepts that aren't being taught other ways, and they can make for a really creative game. So I do have those. That my aspirations are to come out with at least one new game a year, and then have the book to follow. And then over a long-term horizon, that this becomes a really nice set that a family can have, and or you can play with your friends if you don't have a family yet. But I want it to be something that people would actually like to play. So that's my criteria. I want it to be fun to play by itself, but educational if you want to. And I just enjoy games. I enjoy designing games. So this is the way I'm going to do it. And along the way, I get to learn, and then I can keep writing articles or other content to go with it. So I just enjoy it. So
that's awesome. So I know you and your wife are kind of on tour right now, basically promoting the game and traveling all over. Where are some of your next stops in case people want to find you? And if they're not going to be in the same place as you are, where can they go to purchase the game and learn more about what you do?
Oh, I appreciate that. So the easiest way to you can go backwards on that. The easiest way to get the game is to go to the website, freemarketkids.com. So the other games that we're going to come out with, we'll try to put them out there as coming soon or pre-order or something like that. You can also sign up for our email list, and we try to keep you informed that way. So we've been to Bitcoin Park in Nashville and had a game event there. My wife and I are co-organizers here in Louisville, along with another gentleman named Trent. And we've played in Louisville. We've played in Cincinnati and Lexington. We have visited Indianapolis, but we haven't actually done a game there. When we were in St. Louis for the convention, the homeschooling convention, we teamed up with the St. Charles meetup group, and they were awesome. And we had a great meetup game event there. So that basically means we've been in Missouri, Ohio, Tennessee, Kentucky. This week, we're going to travel to North Carolina, and we're basically tying in a college visit for our kids with the local meetup there. We're hoping to organize in Georgia next month, as well as because we're going to be on our way to Miami. And at Miami, we have the opportunity to actually set up the game on the second day of Thank God for Bitcoin, which is a mini conference prior to the big conference. So those are the places we're going to be. So North Carolina, maybe Georgia, and Florida are the places we're going to be next. Tali's goal is, she said, let's see if we can go to all 50 states before the next halving. That gives us basically 1 year to try to hit all the states. That's our aspiration. And we're hitting the local ones that we can drive to first, obviously.
Nice.
But this is going to be a big undertaking. But on the other hand, it feels pretty cool to get around and meet other people and just hang out and get to know each other and talk on Bitcoin or homeschooling.
Bitcoin homeschooling evangelist / missionary. I love it.
Yeah. Yes. That's a good umbrella summary. Like that's a good way of capturing it.
Connor, Matt, as we wrap things up, do you guys have some additional questions?
I'll just say that we're looking forward. I don't have my ticket yet, but I'm very, very likely going to be at the Thank God for Bitcoin conference, and I know Matt's going to be there.
Yep.
Oh, great!
So we're looking forward to hopefully seeing you there.
I'll be ready to play the game.
Guys, come on up and we'll have it out. Yeah, I'm glad you guys are able to go. It looks like they've lined up some amazing speakers for that. So it looks like it's going to be a really good event.
I have a big work thing. I have a big work thing. That's why I'm not going. I feel terrible. I have a really busy work thing, and if it wasn't for a bunch of meetings that week, I would be right there with these guys. So I'm really stoked for you all to be able to go. It looks like an awesome time.
You can do they're doing the streaming version.
That's what I'll probably end up doing, honestly.
Yeah. So I know Jordan is one of the organizers, one of the co-authors of the book. That was important to them to try to increase their outreach, and I think it's probably causing him a lot of stress. But they're doing it in order to reach more people like yourself who can't physically make it to the event.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good to know. Yeah, and Scott, from our side here at Crypto Conversion, to you, we really appreciate you coming on, being able to share your wealth of knowledge and the opportunity for people to learn more about Bitcoin through your games and your writings. I really appreciate it. Also, check out Scott's article he wrote for Bitcoin Magazine. Homeschoolers are Bitcoiners who don't know it yet. That's a fun read that anybody can have access to, just to kind of learn more about Scott. And of course, follow him and Free Market Kids on Twitter. Scott Lindberg, you'll find him. He's the one with the Bitcoin eyes, and then Free Market Kids is just at Free Market Kids. So to see whatever is next and on the horizon for them. So Scott, really appreciate you stopping by, and hopefully we can have you on in the future.
I loved it. I appreciate it, guys, and hopefully we help some people, and we'll just keep taking baby steps and talking about this, and long-term perspective, we'll get there. So thank you guys for the opportunity to come on and chat.
We're going to take little Satoshi steps.
Little Satoshi.
There you go.
One Satoshi at a time. All right, everybody. This has been the Crypto Conversion Podcast. Thank you so much for watching. We hope you all enjoyed this episode. We'll try to put some links for some of Scott's materials on the Twitter, or maybe if YouTube will start allowing us to share links, we'll do it that way too. But without further ado, this has been the Crypto Conversion Podcast, and we hope to see you all on the next episode. God bless.